Welcome to the Bible and Science. This is Dave Prentice. I'm a retired public high school teacher, certified in all branches of science and math. I've also taught on the Bible and Science for many years, both in the U.S. and on many overseas mission trips. This is the Bible and Science, episode 49. If you've been following these, you'll say, wait a minute, there already was an episode 49. This one is greatly revised and greatly expanded. In fact, it overlaps with the end of episode 48. So ignore the end of episode 48 and just pay attention to this one. It has to do with whales and other cetaceans. I'm on a Facebook group called Creationism, which really should be called Anti-Creationism. And a lot of people on there are very, very hostile to the concept of creation. And some time ago, a person put on there that the evolution of whales is very extensively documented. Okay, it is not. That's what this episode is all about. It's about whales and other cetaceans. If we look at the way things are supposed to have evolved from fish to mammals, you see that some kind of fish decided to come out of the water, whether it was ichthyosteigids or dipnoids. We don't know which one. We don't. That is, evolutionists don't. Something decided to come out of the water. Okay, it turned into amphibians, and the amphibians evolved into reptiles. Okay, well, the reptiles evolved into land reptiles. Oh, wait a minute. Also, some of them decided to start flying, the flying reptiles. And then some of them went back in the water. Oh no, where the ancestors had come from. That was the marine reptiles called the ichthyosaurs, the sauropterygians and the mosasaurs. Okay, so among the land reptiles, not the water reptiles, they supposedly evolved into stem mammals. And then one of the groups of stem mammals kind of imitated some of the reptiles and said, well, we're going to learn to fly too. So the flying mammals came along, and then the land mammals, of which there are, depending on who you talk to, over 30 orders of land mammals. And then, okay, here we go with the water again. Some of those mammals that had come out of the water decided, no, we liked it over there, our ancestors were happy, so let's go back into the water. So they supposedly evolved into semi-aquatic mammals like the platypus, seals, and so forth, manatees. And then some of them decided to become fully aquatic, the whales and the dolphins. All of these are supposed to be the result of random mutations in DNA. So where did they come from? I'm particularly focusing on whales, the cetaceans. They're supposedly most closely related to artiodactyls, which is hoofed animals with an odd number of toes. Those with an even number are called perissodactyls. Well, the hippopotamus is supposedly the closest animal among the land mammals to the whales and so forth. So there are quite a number of land animals, but the one that we focus on is the hippopotamus. That's supposed to be the one that is the ancestor of the marine reptiles, but specifically the whales. Not all of the whales, not all of the marine reptiles. Otters are not considered to be descended from these. Manatees and dugongs are not either. It's just the hippopotamus is supposed to be related to the ancestor of the whales. So why are things similar? There are certainly some similarities between whales and hippopotamuses or hippopotami. Well, they're both pretty fat. They both spend a lot of time in the water. Well, hippopotamus spends a lot. Whale spends all the time in the water. So why are those similarities there? According to initial complexity, which is creation, it says life went from complex to simple. At the beginning of life, whoever or whatever started it in a complex, organized condition. So similarities between different types would be due to common design. Whereas Evolution, initial disorganization, simple to complex, says no, the similarities are due to common ancestry, convergent evolution, things like that. Okay, back to initial complexity. Differences between various types are due to built-in genetic variation. According to evolution, differences are due to random evolution, that is, an accumulation of mutation. Complexity creation in and of itself doesn't require any specific amount of time. I'm a biblical creationist. I would say it's a short period of time. There are others that are old earth creationists. So it doesn't require a specific amount of time, but it allows for a relatively short time period. Evolution, on the other hand, requires hundreds of millions of years, or perhaps even billions of years. Things on Earth are supposed to be evolving for about 3.5 billion years. Creation, initial complexity, at least a young Earth model, requires catastrophic events. I believe Noah's flood was a real event. Now, if you believe in evolution, it says, no, there were no catastrophic events. It's only uniform, slow, steady, gradual processes called uniformitarianism. Can I prove there are catastrophes? No, I can present some pretty good evidence. Can you prove that there were no catastrophes? No, you can't even present any reasonable evidence for that. So supposedly, whales evolved from something along the lines of a hippopotamus, one of the artiodactyls. So when we say something evolved, that means its DNA changed. DNA is a lengthy chain of chemicals called nucleotides or bases. They're represented by A, C, G, and T, adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. They pair up. A matches with T, C matches with G. So we often describe the contents of DNA as base pairs. The base pairs correspond to the letters of the alphabet. If you want to write a book, you have to put letters in a certain order. Well, okay, if you want to make a living thing, you have to put base pairs in a certain order. Even the very simplest bacteria have millions of base pairs. Mammals have several billion with a B. So how much information is that? Let's compare that to the famous book War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. It has about 3 million letters and spaces. 3 million letters, 3 million spaces. Okay, so compare that to a simple living thing. 3 million for War and Peace. The number of base pairs in the DNA of most mammals is over 3 billion with a B, more than 1,000 times as many genetic letters as the letters in War and Peace. Changing even one of those letters, one of those base pairs in DNA, can lead to lethal consequences. For example, sickle cell anemia is the result of one single mutation out of about 3 billion in the DNA. So why would things mutate? Why would they evolve? If you read any of the professional articles, it's amazing to me that these people seem to have flunked biology. Many professional articles implicitly appeal to the false concept called Lamarckianism that says that evolving organisms develop new features as they need them. It doesn't work that way. I don't care what you do to your physical features, the effects are not going to pass on to the descendants. I can pump my arms, I can build up my arms until I'm a real muscle man. My kids won't be any stronger when they're born later. You could cut off parts of your body for many generations, and the next generation is still going to have those parts. What you've done to the external structures of your body has no effect on the DNA. And the DNA is what produces all of your features. So we're going to focus on whales today and in the next episode. The only way to add or remove features would be by adding or removing genes. Well, how many genes would you have to add or remove to go from some ancestor, some land animal, to whales? You're going to have to go through mutations, copying mistakes in DNA. And in an earlier episode, we dealt with that about how there are multiple error correcting mechanisms in DNA. And people that say, well, the error correcting mechanism wasn't there at the beginning, well, that means the error correcting mechanism arose because of errors that were not corrected. Well, okay, how many errors that were not corrected would it require to go from some ancestor like hippopotami or something along those lines to various kinds of whales? There would be many, many, many side branches, probably far more than the number of final branches, many side branches of things that are almost whales. There are not. So the idea of Lamarckianism has been thoroughly falsified. For instance, somebody tried cutting off the tails of 100 generations of mice, and the next generation is born with tails. So it doesn't matter what you do to the individual, unless you make the DNA mutate somehow, you're not going to affect future generations. Organisms do not get new features as they need them. They only get what their DNA gives them. So why would anything evolve into anything else? The structures in any living thing, the bones, hearts, brains, tails, and so forth, are present. Why? Because the DNA of that organism, of that individual, contains the instruction on how to put them there. So in order for something to evolve into the first mammals and then into dozens, probably a lot more than dozens, of divergent types would require at least thousands, perhaps millions of mutations, not only mutations, but beneficial mutations, something that has a good effect on the animal. Each step would have to build on all of the mutations from the lower types. So in the case of whales, there should be far more almost whales than there are final forms. And this would have to happen in spite of the error correcting mechanisms in DNA reproduction. So besides whales, there are several types of fully aquatic or semi-aquatic animals, mammals. There are several modern mammals besides whales that spend much or all of their time in the water. The only one considered to be a distant relative is the hippopotamus. So there's a hippo at the upper left. Okay, doesn't look very much like a whale, except that it's big and fat. But you also have aquatic animals like the walrus. You have aquatic animals like the dugong. And you have semi-aquatic animals like the platypus. I don't know if anybody else likes Phineas and Ferb. Perry is a egg-laying mammal, semi-aquatic mammal of action. And then there are seals and sea lions that are also semi-aquatic. They can come out of the water and do stuff on land. The dugong can't. The walrus can. The platypus can. So where did they come from? Did they evolve from one to the other? Nope, they did not. There's no evidence for it, fossil or living. So the order that includes whales and the other fully aquatic creatures, not the dugongs, they're a separate order, but the order is Cetaceous. That includes whales, dolphins, porpoises, things like that. So here are some features that are common to all of the cetaceans. And remember, these had to come from something along the lines of a hippo. They have fins, that is flippers instead of legs. They have blubber to control their body temperature instead of sweat glands. They have a greatly modified eye that focuses in water instead of in air. And they have very smooth skin, special skin to help streamline movement through the water. Then, okay, you're an air-breathing creature and you're about to have babies and you don't want your babies to drown. You're going to have to come up with some sort of a method for the newborn baby who's born underwater to not drown. Then, once the babies have been born, they're having to hold their breath. Well, somehow or other, they have to nurse. Whales and dolphins and so forth, they nurse their babies in the water and the babies can't drown, because if the babies drown, that's it, evolution stops. And many whales have a hearing apparatus. We hear about how good dog hearing is and how good bat hearing. Whale hearing puts that to shame. Hearing apparatus is much better in many of the whales than in dogs or even of bats. Then here you are a creature that's born in the water, and you've got to live in the water, and you have to go to sleep. Well, what happens if you go to sleep and you inhale underwater? You're going to drown. The brain of cetaceans allows partial sleep. Part of the body goes to sleep, part of the brain goes to sleep, but some of the rest stays awake so that they can maintain enough awareness to come to the surface to breathe and not drown. And then some of the whales have one blowhole, others have two blowholes, but there has to be a protective flap inside the blowholes to prevent water from rushing in. And many of the whales have unusual characteristics we would consider unusual. They make sound in the water. They are able to make sound underwater without expelling air. They don't run out of air when they're doing their whale songs. You've probably seen some movies like the Star Trek movie where they were trying to get whales. Well, the whales are going, I think what they're saying is, it's wet down here. But the whales have the ability to make sound underwater without expelling air, because they need to keep that air. So the exact method depends upon which type of whale. Here are the two main types of whales. The baleen whale has got, instead of teeth, it has plates that I'll show you in a minute that it uses to catch its food. The toothed whales, which include the large whales like sperm whales and the smaller ones like porpoises and dolphins and so forth, those are of a different type. So the living cetaceans include over 90 species of whales. Two of the most obvious types are the baleen whales and also the toothed whales. Baleen whales do not have teeth. Instead, they have curtains that are called baleen that are used to filter out food from ocean water. There's no other animal that has anything like baleen. You might say, okay, well, certain insects do. There's no other mammal that has anything that might serve as some sort of an evolutionary precursor to baleen. If you look at the lower left, you'll see there's some curtains of baleen. They're not rigid tissues. They're something along the lines of hair and fingernails and so forth, that made out of keratin. So these large whales, the baleen whales, they take in a huge mouthful of water and then they push it out with their tongues, and they close the baleen meanwhile, and they trap their food, which is going to be things like plankton and small sea creatures like shrimp and so forth. So there are a number of examples of those. The blue whale, which is the largest animal anybody has ever discovered, is a baleen whale. And likewise, the humpback whale, these are the ones you saw in the Star Trek movie, trying to communicate with each other. And then there's a group of them called the right whales. Why is it called the right whale? Because the whalers said, that's the right one. We're going to get a lot of whale oil out of that one. It's pretty cruel to the whales. These are very intelligent creatures. So anyway, I guess they knew somebody's coming after them with a harpoon. Okay, let's look at some of the features of the baleen whales. The baleen whales use, instead of teeth, they use baleen curtains to catch their prey. They take in a huge mouthful of water, then they push it out with their tongues, and they trap plankton, small shrimp, and so on. They have two blowholes instead of one. Okay, those of us that are land animals, we have two nostrils. Well, they have two blowholes, but then the other type, they only have one. So the blue whale, the baleen whales have specialized larynxes that allow them to produce whale songs, I hope you like my whale song, at over 180 decibels. 180 decibels, that's a whole lot louder than a jet engine. And they don't lose air when they do it. So the songs go in all directions, and other whales thousands of miles away can hear this because the water is a very good carrier of sound. So exactly what do they use their whale songs for? People have done experiments and research and so forth and found out that there seem to be certain whale dialects or whale tunes or whale songs that will gradually spread. If one introduces a new one, it'll gradually spread through all of the baleen whales. Some of these baleen whales have a lung capacity of up to 1,300 gallons, that's well over 4,000 liters of air. Some of the largest toothed whales are things like the sperm whale. There's a picture at the upper right showing you how they have a much different jaw than the land animals do. But then you'll also see that there are killer whales, that's called orca. That is the only whale that seems to actively seek out other mammals, such as seals and sometimes other whales, to eat. These guys can be 30-some feet long, and they've never been known to attack a human in the wild. Now, in the aquariums, I guess they get mad about being locked into fish tanks, and they have attacked and killed some of the people in the aquariums. But out in the ocean, what they use their sound for is to find food, and they can tell, they're very intelligent. They can tell whether it's a human, a seal, or whatever. And they'll actually go after some of the larger whales, which, if they're individuals, are defenseless. The larger whales will sometimes form a ring so they can defend themselves against these guys. But there's also this really cute guy in the middle called the beluga. And then there's pilot whales that were nicknamed that because it's like they're a pilot trying to lead the ships to the correct place to come into shore. Some of the smaller toothed whales are porpoises. There's an example of the Yangtze finless porpoise. And kind of similar to the porpoise is the dolphin. The shape of the head, the shape of the beak is a bit different. The beak size and beak shape, the shape of the fins is different, and also the tooth shape is different. But you could say they're kind of similar. But here's a really cool one. If you look on the bottom center of that page, you'll see the narwhal. It's like a whale unicorn. There's no other mammal that has a structure anything like that horn. Where did that come from? What did it evolve from? Must have been accidental copying mistakes in DNA, right? I don't buy that. It looks to me like they're designed. Here's some of the special features of the toothed whales. A group called Cuvier's beaked whales, they can hold their breath for over 3 hours. So if you go to watch the movie Titanic, the whale holds its breath when the movie starts, and it holds its breath all the way through the whole movie, and then it blows out the air and gets another breath. They can hold their breath for over 3 hours. They can also dive 3,000 meters down. That's over 9,000 feet, 9,200 feet. That's way past the crush depth of our most advanced submarines. Nuclear subs don't even attempt to go down there that deep. And these whales, they come up to the surface, take a lungful of air, and then they go down and they swim around for 3 hours looking for food. Toothed whales don't chew. They use their teeth to grasp their food, which they swallow whole. And the toothed whales have one blowhole as compared to the baleen whales that have two blowholes instead of nostrils on the front. So all of these things happen supposedly by random mutations in the DNA. I don't buy that. So baleen whale songs go in all directions, and they can communicate for many, many, many miles, hundreds of miles, perhaps thousands of miles. That's the baleen whales. That's just apparently communication. But the toothed whales, they use it to find food. So the sperm whales, which are among the tooth group, they use unidirectional clicks. They click in one direction. And how loud is it? They've been clocked at 236 decibels. That's a whole lot louder than a thunderclap. So they're able to put out the sound, but it doesn't go every direction. It just goes in the direction where they're looking for food, so they can find food from quite a distance away. Where do whales live? Okay, they occupy at least 5 different environments, 5 different habitats. 3 of the major types of whales are estuarine. They live in shallow waters near outlets of rivers and lakes. About 8 occupy a coastal environment of less than 50 meters depth. About 3 dwell in the relatively narrow band above the drop-off of the continental shelf from about 50 to 200 meters. And about 8 live mainly around the shelf break, maybe a little further, at 200 meters or so. And there are some that will venture into depths that range from a little more to 200 meters to 3,000 meters in the deep ocean. That would easily crush a submarine. So why do they have these features? Because their DNA has the information to produce the features. The habitat does not determine the DNA. The DNA determines the habitat where the whale will live. So the question is, where did whales come from? If you go to a museum or read articles online, you're probably going to see something like this, where the early whales had legs, 4 legs, and they ventured into the water, and they gradually spent more and more and more and more time. Well, if you want to do that, get your kids to agree, and their grandkids and so forth, that you will never come back on land and see if your legs disappear. No, you have legs because your DNA has the coding for legs. These guys, the 4-legged creatures that are called whale ancestors, they just simply have legs. So the blue whale, which is the largest whale ever, it gets up to 30 meters long, which is about 100 feet, which is about the length of maybe 3 school buses. So when did they get so big? I had read up on this and found out it was only in the last few million years. No, it turns out that the Middle Eocene, which is dated according to evolutionary timescale, at about 35 million years ago, there was a Parusetus and a Basilosaurus that were each about 2/3 of the length of the blue whale. So instead of 3 school buses long, they were 2 school buses long. And this is from the early days of whales. So wait a minute, how did they evolve from those creatures that have 4 legs, and they got so big, and they also got rid of their legs at a very early time? What did they evolve from? These are some of the alleged transitions. Basilosaurus up at the top, that is definitely a whale. But Myocetus, that has 4 legs. Rhodocetus has 4 legs. Pakicetus, Ambulocetus, those have 4 legs. They're proposed as transitions because there's nothing else to offer in their place. It has nothing to do with evolution. There's still a number of semi-aquatic animals with legs in the world today. They're not ancestors of whales. Well, evolutionists reject the idea that whales appeared in an initially complex form, that is creation. Some have proposed, where did they come from? They must have evolved from even-toed hoofed animals, the artiodactyls, perhaps something along the lines of hippos. Not the hippo itself, but a sister taxon of hippos. Over many generations, the ancestors supposedly spent more and more time in the water, and they finally lost all their land features and became completely aquatic. Well, the argument for that scenario is that whale DNA is closer to hippos than to any other land animals. But how close is the DNA of whales to hippos really? In order to do valid comparisons of two types, we need to compare the complete genome. We don't have a complete genome for any type of whale, and we don't have a complete genome for hippos. So that's where we'll continue next time, talking about the possibility that whales evolved from something along the lines of hippos. So I won't see you, but you'll see me then.